On a busy Monday morning at Washington Dulles International Airport, Admiral James Williams stood in line at the check-in counter, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit and holding his first-class ticket to San Diego. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates, but Williams maintained his characteristic calm, developed over 35 years of distinguished military service. At 58 years old, Williams carried himself with the quiet dignity that came from becoming one of the few African-American admirals in U.S. Navy history. His salt-and-pepper hair and kind eyes masked the strength of a man who had commanded fleets and shaped military strategy at the highest levels. As he approached the counter, Williams noticed the gate agent's slight change in expression, a barely perceptible shift he had grown unfortunately familiar with throughout his life. The agent, a woman in her mid-30s named Sarah Mitchell, glanced at his ticket and then back at him several times, her fingers hovering uncertainly over her keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir," Mitchell said, her voice carrying a hint of practiced politeness, "but there seems to be a system error with your reservation." She shuffled some papers on her desk, avoiding direct eye contact. Behind Williams, a group of business travelers in expensive suits continued their loud conversation about golf courses and stock portfolios. The Admiral observed as Mitchell warmly greeted the next passenger in line, a white gentleman in his 50s, and promptly processed his first-class ticket without question. Williams had experienced similar situations countless times before. As one of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy, he had learned to handle discrimination with grace and strategic patience. His command experience had taught him that sometimes the most powerful response was a measured one. The terminal's air conditioning hummed overhead as Williams calmly reached into his breast pocket, where his military ID rested next to his heart. He hadn't planned on pulling rank today. It wasn't his style, but sometimes circumstances required making a point. "Ma'am," he said softly, maintaining his professional demeanor, "could you please double-check the system? I confirmed my first-class reservation personally yesterday." His voice carried the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding thousands of sailors. Mitchell's fingers clacked against her keyboard with increased intensity. "I'm showing all first-class seats are occupied by priority passengers," she replied, her tone growing more defensive. "We can accommodate you in economy class, or you can try standby for the next flight." The irony of being classified as non-priority wasn't lost on Williams, who had spent the previous week briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on naval strategy in the Pacific. He noticed several other passengers now watching the interaction with interest, some shaking their heads in recognition of what was unfolding. The situation was beginning to draw attention from nearby airline staff. A young flight attendant whispered something to her colleague, who disappeared toward the cockpit. Williams remained steady, his military training kicking in as it had countless times in more challenging situations. What started as a routine check-in was transforming into a moment that would soon go viral on social media and spark yet another national conversation about prejudice in everyday America. But for now, Williams stood patiently at the counter, his credentials still tucked away, waiting for the right moment to reveal his rank. The air grew thicker with tension as more passengers gathered their phones, sensing something significant was about to happen. A young mother explained quietly to her curious daughter why some people were treated differently because of their skin color. An elderly veteran in a Korean War cap watched the scene unfold with a knowing look of disappointment. Williams thought about all the young sailors under his command, especially the ones who faced similar situations without the protection of rank and status. He knew this moment wasn't just about his first-class seat. It was about standing up for dignity in the face of prejudice, about maintaining composure when others lost theirs. As the pilot emerged from the cockpit, walking briskly toward the check-in counter, Williams took a deep breath. He hadn't planned on making a statement today, but sometimes leadership meant seizing unexpected moments to teach important lessons. The next few minutes would prove to be more than just a confrontation over airline seating. They would become a powerful reminder that character and rank weren't always visible at first glance. To be continued. The pilot, Captain Michael Roberts, approached the check-in counter with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He had been informed of a situation with a passenger, but the composed figure of Admiral Williams wasn't what he had expected to find. The pilot's name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he positioned himself beside the gate agent. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Roberts asked, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to managing difficult situations at 35,000 feet. he glanced between Williams and Mitchell, taking in the scene before him. Sarah Mitchell quickly explained her version of events, her words tumbling out faster than usual. "There's been a system error with this gentleman's reservation. We're trying to accommodate him in economy class since first class is full with priority passengers." Williams noticed how she emphasized the word priority, as if to suggest he couldn't possibly belong in that category. The Admiral's experience in naval diplomacy had taught him to read between the lines of what people said, and what they left unsaid. More passengers had gathered around now, their phones discreetly recording the unfolding drama. A businesswoman in a sharp pantsuit shook her head in disgust, while an elderly couple whispered to each other, their disapproving glances directed at the gate agent. "May I see your ticket, sir?" Captain Roberts asked Williams, maintaining a professional tone. The Admiral handed over his ticket, watching as the pilot's eyes scanned the details. "Everything appears to be in order here. First class, confirmed reservation." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably at her station. "But sir, the system shows," she began, before the pilot cut her off with a raised hand. "Let me take a look at that system," Captain Roberts said, leaning over to view her screen. As he did so, Williams caught sight of two young African-American boys watching the scene intently from nearby seats. Their mother held their hands tightly, and Williams could see this moment becoming a lesson they'd never forget. The tension in the air was palpable as Captain Roberts scrolled through the passenger manifest. Behind Williams, the group of business travelers had fallen silent, their earlier boisterous conversation about golf courses forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. "Miss Mitchell," the pilot said slowly, "I'm seeing several first-class seats still available. In fact, there's one right next to the window, seat 2A. His tone carried a hint of challenge as he turned to face her directly. The gate agent's face flushed red as she stammered. "But those seats are reserved for—" She trailed off, unable to complete her sentence under the pilot's steady gaze. It was at this moment that Williams decided it was time. With deliberate slowness, he reached into his breast pocket and withdrew his military ID and credentials. The metal insignia of his 4-star Admiral rank caught the light as he placed them on the counter. The effect was immediate. Captain Roberts' eyes widened as he recognized the significance of the credentials before him. As a former military pilot himself, he knew exactly what those 4 stars represented. "Admiral Williams," the pilot said, straightening his posture instinctively, "I apologize for this situation, sir." The respect in his voice was genuine, tinged with embarrassment at how one of the Navy's highest-ranking officers had been treated. The gathered crowd murmured as they realized what was happening. The two young boys' mouths dropped open in awe as they tugged at their mother's sleeve, pointing at Williams' credentials. Sarah Mitchell's face had lost all color as she stared at the military ID. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the keyboard, no doubt remembering every dismissive word she had spoken to the Admiral. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Williams said calmly, his voice carrying across the now quiet terminal. "Perhaps we should review the airline's policy on confirmed first-class reservations." His words were measured, but their impact was clear to everyone within earshot. The incident was quickly becoming more than just a dispute over airline seating. It was transforming into a powerful moment of accountability, one that would soon travel far beyond the confines of Dulles International Airport. As phones continued recording and witnesses watched in silence, the next few minutes would prove crucial in determining how this story would be told and retold across the nation. To be continued. Captain Roberts quickly took control of the situation, his demeanor shifting from authoritative to apologetic. "Admiral Williams, please allow me to personally escort you to your seat," he said, reaching for the Admiral's carry-on bag. The pilot's earlier confidence had been replaced by a deep sense of professional embarrassment. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen at her station, her face a mixture of shock and shame as the reality of her actions began to sink in. The terminal had grown unusually quiet, with even the usual airport announcements seeming muted against the weight of the moment. "One moment, Captain," Williams said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded naval fleets. "I believe we need to address something larger than my seating assignment." He turned to face the gathered crowd, many of whom were still recording with their phones. A young woman in the crowd, wearing a CNN press badge, had already begun taking notes on her phone. Several rows back, an off-duty flight attendant watched with particular interest, knowing this incident would soon become a major training example for airline staff. Williams spoke clearly, his words measured and purposeful. This situation isn't just about a first-class seat, it's about dignity and respect, something every passenger deserves, regardless of their rank or position. His gaze swept across the onlookers, landing briefly on the two young African-American boys who continued to watch in fascination. The mother of the two boys stepped forward, her voice slightly shaky but determined. "Admiral, sir," she said, "I want to thank you for standing up like this. My sons need to see that these moments matter." Her words carried the weight of countless similar experiences shared by many in the crowd. Several other passengers began sharing their own stories, speaking up about times they'd faced similar discrimination. The terminal had transformed into an impromptu forum, with Williams's dignified presence serving as a catalyst for long-suppressed conversations. Captain Roberts listened intently, his discomfort visible but his attention unwavering. As a pilot with 20 years of experience, he had never faced a situation quite like this. The airline's training had covered customer service and conflict resolution, but nothing had prepared him for this moment of real accountability. Sarah Mitchell had begun to cry silently at her station, the gravity of her actions finally hitting home. A supervisor had arrived and was quietly reviewing the situation, his face growing more concerned with each passing minute. "Miss Mitchell," Williams said, turning back to the gate agent, "I hope this becomes a learning moment. Not just for you, but for everyone who witnesses it." His tone wasn't angry or vindictive. Instead, it carried the wisdom of someone who had seen both the worst and best of human nature. The two young boys had moved closer, their eyes fixed on Williams's four-star insignia. The Admiral noticed their interest and gave them a warm smile, knowing that his handling of this situation could shape their understanding of how to face injustice with dignity. "Sir," the airline supervisor intervened, "I want to assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. Our airline has strict policies against discrimination of any kind." His words sounded hollow against the reality of what had just transpired. Williams nodded thoughtfully before responding. "Actions speak louder than policies," he said. "I've spent my career protecting the rights of all Americans. Sometimes that duty calls us to stand firm, even in unexpected places like airport terminals." The gathered crowd murmured in agreement. Several veterans in the audience had moved closer, standing at a respectful distance but clearly showing their support. One older man, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, offered a crisp salute. By now, social media was already buzzing with early accounts of the incident. Passengers were sending messages and posting videos, ensuring that this moment wouldn't be forgotten or dismissed. The hashtag Admiral Williams was beginning to trend. As the situation continued to unfold, it became clear that this wasn't going to be resolved with a simple seating reassignment. The Admiral's steady presence had transformed a potential confrontation into a powerful teaching moment about respect, dignity, and the ongoing struggle for equal treatment in everyday America. To be continued. The airline supervisor, James Thompson, pulled out his tablet and began typing rapidly, knowing this incident would require immediate attention from corporate headquarters. The crowded terminal had become unnaturally quiet, with even passing travelers slowing down to witness the unfolding scene. "Admiral Williams," Thompson said, his voice carrying a nervous edge, "I'd like to offer you an upgrade to our premium first-class suite for your inconvenience." He glanced at Sarah Mitchell, who was still visibly shaken at her station. Williams raised his hand slightly, stopping Thompson mid-sentence. "Mr. Thompson, I don't want special treatment. I want the seat I originally booked, nothing more, nothing less. That's all any passenger should expect, to receive what they've rightfully paid for." The CNN reporter had moved closer, her phone recording every word. Behind her, several other passengers nodded in agreement with the Admiral's statement. The two young boys were now sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely captivated by the scene. Captain Roberts cleared his throat. "Sir, if you'll allow me to explain our boarding procedures." He stopped as Williams turned to face him directly. "Captain," Williams said calmly, "I've commanded vessels with thousands of sailors, managed billion-dollar budgets, and coordinated international naval operations. I understand procedures. What I witnessed today wasn't about procedures. It was about assumptions and bias." A middle-aged woman in a business suit stepped forward from the crowd. "This happened to me last month," she said, her voice carrying across the terminal. But I didn't have 4 stars to make them listen. Several others murmured in agreement, sharing knowing looks. The story was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. Local news crews had begun arriving at the terminal, drawn by the viral tweets and videos. The airline's public relations team was already calling Thompson's phone repeatedly. Sarah Mitchell finally found her voice again. "Admiral," she said softly, "I want to apologize. I didn't realize." She trailed off as Williams turned to face her. "Miss Mitchell," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. "That's precisely the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's rank or status to treat them with respect. Every person who walks up to this counter deserves the same consideration." The mother of the 2 boys had taken out a notebook and was writing down Williams's words. "My boys need to remember this," she explained to those nearby. "They need to know how to handle these situations with dignity." The terminal's regular announcements continued in the background, creating a strange contrast with the profound moment unfolding at the gate. Passengers for other flights stopped to watch, many recording the scene on their phones. A young airline employee, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. "Admiral," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm in training to be a gate agent. Thank you for this lesson. It's not in any of our manuals, but it should be." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most important lessons aren't found in manuals," he responded. "They're learned through experience and reflection." The crowd had grown larger, with airport security maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring paths remained clear for other travelers. The story was now trending nationally on social media, with comments and shares multiplying by the minute. Captain Roberts, who had been quiet for several minutes, finally spoke again. "Admiral Williams, you're absolutely right. We need to do better. All of us." His words carried the weight of genuine realization rather than mere professional obligation. The supervisor's phone continued buzzing with calls from corporate headquarters. The airline's senior management was scrambling to respond to the rapidly spreading story. Thompson looked increasingly uncomfortable as he read the incoming messages. What had started as a simple check-in had evolved into something much more significant. A moment that would be referenced in corporate training sessions, discussed in media outlets, and remembered by everyone present as an example of how to confront discrimination with dignity and purpose. To be continued. The airport's atmosphere had shifted dramatically as more passengers gathered around Gate A7. Media crews had set up their equipment at a respectful distance, while social media continued to explode with updates about the incident. #Admiral Williams and #Dignity in Flight were now trending nationwide. Thompson's tablet chimed with an urgent message from the airline's CEO. "Admiral Williams," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "our chief executive officer would like to speak with you personally." He held out his tablet, displaying a request for a video call. Williams shook his head slowly. "Mr. Thompson, this isn't about me speaking to executives. This is about changing how things work here on the ground, where it matters most." His words carried the weight of decades of leadership experience. The 2 young boys had moved closer to their mother, who was still taking notes. The older one tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be like him." His words were overheard by those nearby, causing several people to smile despite the tension. A group of off-duty airline employees had gathered nearby, many of them taking notes on their phones. This impromptu lesson in leadership and dignity would likely be shared in break rooms and training sessions for years to come. Sarah Mitchell, who had been quietly observing, suddenly stepped out from behind her counter. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Admiral Williams," she said, "I want to do more than apologize. I want to learn from this. Would you be willing to share what you think we need to change?" The terminal fell silent as Williams considered her question. Even the usual airport announcements seemed to pause, as if giving space for this important moment. "First," Williams began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd, "we need to acknowledge that these aren't isolated incidents. What happened here today happens to people every day, at airports, restaurants, stores, and offices across the country." He gestured to the diverse crowd gathered around the gate. "Look around. Every person here has a story, a dignity that deserves respect. My rank shouldn't be what makes you listen. My humanity should be enough. Everyone's humanity should be enough." The CNN reporter had stopped taking notes, her pen frozen mid-sentence as she listened. Several passengers were wiping tears from their eyes, moved by the Admiral's words. Captain Roberts stepped forward again. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to implement immediate changes in how we train our staff. Your experience today, it's shown us where we're failing." The supervisor's tablet continued buzzing with messages from corporate headquarters, but he had stopped checking them, completely absorbed in the Admiral's impromptu lesson in human dignity. A young flight attendant raised her hand. "Admiral," she said, "would you be willing to help us develop better training programs? Your perspective could help prevent this from happening to others." Williams looked at the two young boys, still watching with wide-eyed attention. "Change doesn't just come from new programs or policies," he said. "It comes from each of us deciding to do better, to see each other's humanity first." The mother of the two boys stood up straighter. "My sons will remember this day," she said proudly. "They're learning how to stand up for themselves with grace and dignity." The crowd had grown even larger, with passengers from other gates joining the impromptu gathering. Airport staff had begun setting up barriers to maintain clear walking paths through the terminal. Sarah Mitchell, who had been listening intently, suddenly straightened her uniform and turned to face the crowd. "Starting right now," she announced, "things will be different at this counter. Admiral Williams has shown us a better way." The terminal buzzed with approval as Williams nodded in acknowledgement. This moment was transforming from a confrontation into something more powerful, a catalyst for real change. To be continued. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted as Admiral Williams checked his watch. His flight to San Diego was scheduled to depart in 40 minutes, and despite the profound impact of the moment, there was still the practical matter of his travel to address. Captain Roberts seemed to read his thoughts. "Admiral, shall we proceed to your seat now?" he asked, gesturing toward the aircraft. "I believe we've kept you here long enough." The pilot's demeanor had completely transformed from his initial approach to the situation. As Williams gathered his belongings, a senior airline executive burst through the terminal doors, having rushed from a nearby office. Linda Chen, the regional director of operations, approached with a mix of concern and determination on her face. "Admiral Williams," she said, slightly out of breath, "I came as soon as I heard. This is completely unacceptable, and we're taking immediate action." She glanced at Sarah Mitchell, who was still standing quietly near her counter. Williams raised his hand gently. "Ms. Chen, I hope that immediate action means positive changes, not punitive measures. Ms. Mitchell has shown courage in acknowledging her mistakes and committing to do better. That's what real leadership looks like." The two young boys, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, nudged each other and whispered, "That's why he's an admiral." Their mother smiled proudly, knowing they were witnessing a masterclass in leadership and grace. As Williams began walking toward the jet bridge, passengers from other gates lined the path, many offering quiet words of thanks or respectful nods. Veterans in the crowd stood at attention, offering crisp salutes which the Admiral returned with equal respect. The CNN reporter approached one last time. "Admiral, what message would you like people to take from this incident?" she asked, holding her microphone expectantly. Williams paused, looking back at the gathered crowd. "This isn't about one incident or one airline. It's about how we treat each other every day. Change happens when we decide to be better, not just when we're caught being wrong." Sarah Mitchell stepped forward one last time. "Admiral," she said, her voice stronger now, "I'd like to walk you to your seat, if you'll allow me. Not because of your rank, but because it's the right thing to do for any passenger who's been treated unfairly." The crowd watched as Williams nodded his acceptance. The simple walk to his seat had become a powerful symbol of transformation and learning. As they approached the aircraft door, Captain Roberts addressed his crew. "Today's lesson goes beyond our flight manual," he announced. "It's about seeing the humanity in every passenger who steps aboard our aircraft." The first-class cabin had been prepared for Williams's arrival. Other passengers in the section watched with interest, having heard about the incident through rapidly spreading social media posts. Linda Chen followed them onto the plane. "Admiral, we'd like to document your experience today, with your permission. Not for publicity, but to create meaningful change in our training programs." Williams settled into his seat, the same one he had originally booked. "Ms. Chen, the best documentation will be in how your staff treats every passenger from this day forward. That's the real test." The two young boys and their mother had followed to the aircraft door to wave goodbye. Thank you, Admiral, the mother called out. You've taught my son something they'll never forget. As the boarding process continued, passengers could be heard discussing the incident throughout the cabin. Social media was flooded with photos and videos, but more importantly, with conversations about dignity, respect, and the power of handling discrimination with grace. Sarah Mitchell stood at the aircraft door, a changed person from the gate agent who had started her shift that morning. She watched as other passengers boarded, making a conscious effort to see each one as Admiral Williams had taught her, as individuals deserving of respect, regardless of their rank or status. To be continued. As Flight 2317 to San Diego reached cruising altitude, the impact of the morning's events continued to ripple through social media and news channels. Inside the cabin, passengers were sharing videos of the incident with those who hadn't witnessed it firsthand, their voices hushed but excited. In the airline's corporate headquarters, emergency meetings were being called. The CEO, Rebecca Martinez, sat at the head of a conference table, watching the viral videos on a large screen. This isn't just a PR crisis, she told her executive team. This is an opportunity to create real change in our industry. Meanwhile, back at Dulles International Airport, Sarah Mitchell's afternoon shift had taken an unexpected turn. Passengers were approaching her counter specifically to discuss the morning's events. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others offered words of encouragement for her willingness to learn and change. The two young boys and their mother had delayed their own flight to share their witness accounts with local news reporters. The Admiral showed us that you don't have to raise your voice to be heard, the older boy said, his words quickly becoming another viral soundbite. In the first-class cabin, Admiral Williams was reviewing emails on his tablet. Messages were pouring in from naval officers, civil rights leaders, and fellow flag officers, all commending his handling of the situation. One message, from a young ensign, particularly caught his attention. "Sir, you've shown us how to fight discrimination without losing our dignity." Captain Roberts made a point to personally check on Williams during the flight. "Admiral," he said quietly, "our crew has been discussing what happened. We're already planning changes to our training programs. Your example today, it's going to make a difference." Back in Washington, the airline's training department was working overtime. Linda Chen had assembled a team to revise their customer service protocols. "We're not just adding new rules," she explained to her staff. "We're changing our entire approach to how we see and treat our passengers." Social media continued to explode with reaction. #Admiral Williams had become the top trending topic nationwide. People were sharing their own experiences of discrimination in travel, but also stories of standing up with dignity and grace. The CNN reporter who had witnessed the event was now broadcasting live from the airport. "What we saw today wasn't just about airline seating," she reported. "It was a masterclass in how to confront bias with dignity and create meaningful change." In the aircraft's galley, flight attendants were discussing the morning's events during a quiet moment. "I've never seen someone handle discrimination so powerfully," one veteran crew member said. "He didn't just solve his own problem, he made us all want to be better." Sarah Mitchell, still at her post in Dulles, had begun keeping a journal of the day's lessons. "Today, an admiral taught me that rank isn't what commands respect," she wrote. "It's how we treat every single person that matters." The airline's social media team was overwhelmed with messages. People weren't just angry about the incident, they were inspired by Williams's response. Comments poured in from around the world, with many sharing how they would use his example in their own lives. As the flight continued westward, passengers occasionally glanced at Williams, not with the usual celebrity curiosity, but with genuine respect. A young girl in business class passed him a note. "Thank you for showing us how to be brave and kind at the same time." The mother of the two boys had started a blog post about the experience. "Today, my sons learned that true leadership isn't about power or position," she wrote. "It's about lifting others up, even when you've been pushed down." In the airport staff break room, employees gathered around televisions showing news coverage of the incident. The story had evolved beyond a simple case of discrimination. It had become a powerful narrative about change, leadership, and human dignity. Linda Chen was already receiving calls from other airlines, all asking the same question: how could they prevent similar incidents and create meaningful change in their own organizations? To be continued. As Flight 2317 began its descent into San Diego International Airport, The story of Admiral Williams's experience had transformed from a viral moment into a movement for change. The aircraft's Wi-Fi system had been buzzing with passengers reading news coverage and sharing social media updates throughout the flight. Captain Roberts's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, I want to thank you all for being part of a historic flight. Today, we learn valuable lessons about dignity, respect, and leadership from one of our distinguished passengers." At Dulles Airport, Sarah Mitchell was ending her shift, but the impact of the day's events was just beginning. The airline had announced immediate changes to their training programs, with Mitchell being asked to share her perspective as part of the new curriculum. The two young boys and their mother had finally boarded their own flight, but not before their story had been shared thousands of times online. The older boy had started a school project titled "How to Stand Up Like an Admiral," which would later win first place in his class. As Williams's flight touched down in San Diego, a group of Navy personnel waited at the gate. Word had spread through military channels, and they wanted to show their support. Among them was a young African-American lieutenant who had faced similar experiences. The airline's CEO, Rebecca Martinez, had just finished a press conference announcing comprehensive changes to the company's policies. "Admiral Williams showed us that real change doesn't come from rules and regulations alone," she stated. "It comes from changing hearts and minds." Social media continued to amplify the story's impact. #Dignity in Flight had evolved into a broader movement, with people sharing stories of standing up to discrimination with grace and strength across all aspects of life. Back at Dulles, Linda Chen was meeting with diversity consultants to revamp the airline's entire approach to customer service. "This isn't just about preventing discrimination," she explained. "It's about creating a culture of genuine respect for every passenger." The CNN story had gone international, with news outlets from around the world picking up the narrative. The focus wasn't just on the incident itself, but on Williams's remarkable response and its lasting impact on everyone involved. As Admiral Williams collected his belongings to depart the aircraft, every passenger stood in quiet respect. A flight attendant handed him a stack of thank you notes written by the crew and passengers during the flight. The mother of the two boys had received hundreds of messages from other parents, asking how to teach their children the same lessons about dignity and courage that her sons had learned that day. Sarah Mitchell received an invitation to speak at a national conference on customer service and diversity. Her story of transformation had become as powerful as the incident itself, showing how genuine change was possible. The airline industry as a whole began examining its practices. Other carriers reached out to Admiral Williams, asking for his input on improving their training and policies. His response was consistent: "See the humanity in every passenger." As Williams finally stepped off the plane in San Diego, he was met not just by military personnel, but by airport staff and passengers who had heard his story. The terminal fell quiet as he walked through, not because of his rank, but because of the dignity he had shown in the face of discrimination. The two young boys had started a social media campaign called Dignity First, sharing stories of people standing up to discrimination with grace. Their mother's blog post had gone viral, inspiring parents nationwide to have important conversations with their children. Captain Roberts made a final announcement before leaving the aircraft. "Today, we didn't just fly from Washington to San Diego. We took the first step toward real change in how we treat each other." The story of Admiral Williams's experience would go on to be included in training materials, school curricula, and leadership courses. But its most lasting impact was in the countless everyday moments when people chose to stand up with dignity, inspired by an admiral who showed that true leadership isn't about rank, it's about respect. As the sun set on both coasts, the day's events had sparked a movement that would continue to inspire change long after the viral videos stopped trending. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest, and true dignity can transform more than just a moment. It can transform a nation. The end.